What if the thing they told us to hide beneath the soil was the very key that could lift an entire continent? What if the darkness they called natural was never the absence of light, but the absence of their grip? And what if Africa never once needed a nod, not from them, not from anyone, to ignite its own power? In the burning heart of the Sahel, Niger came to Burkina Faso not as a beggar, not with hands outstretched, but carrying fire, a promise worth billions, born from black gold torn from its own earth. The West dismisses it as obsolete. Tell that to the boy in a mud brick classroom, his eyes glowing as he bends over a school book by candlelight. Tell that to the grandmother who whispers a prayer each night, yearning for the hum of a fan to cool her dreams. This is not only about energy. This is about the raw, unpolished essence of power, who claims it and who decides when the rest of us may touch the switch. Stay until the final word and subscribe to us, because when Africa's lights blaze into the night, history will remember those who stood in the glow and those who remained in the shadows. The air inside the meeting hall was still, but the moment itself breathed, pulsed, and demanded to be remembered. The delegation from Niger stepped forward, not merely carrying papers, but bearing the weight of a promise heavy enough to tilt the future. They laid the contract before Ibrahim Traore, and for a single suspended heartbeat, the room grew heavier, not with fear, but with the gravity of what was about to be set in motion. Beyond these four walls, Ouagadougou moved, as it always did, the clatter of motorbikes over dusty roads, the sharp laughter of children darting barefoot between market stalls, the sing-song rhythm of bargaining voices, trading coins for bread. Yet here on this polished table lay something that could rewrite those very sounds. A deal worth billions, carved from the earth itself, from the same black gold that for generations had been taken away, leaving only gaping holes in the ground, empty plates on the table, and hunger in the hearts of those who dug it. In Niger's mining towns, the dust is relentless. It coats everything: the cracked hands of men working in the pits, the faded scarves of women waiting by the riverbank, the wooden door frames of homes where children sleep with nails blackened from helping their fathers unload sacks by moonlight. That dust has long been a testament proof of labor. Without liberation, the silent shadow of wealth, stolen before it could ever be touched by those who earned it. But today in this room, that same dust seemed different. It was no longer just residue from the struggle. It was the scent of possibility, the mark of a resource finally claimed in the name of the people who lived above it. It was as if the wind had shifted, carrying the promise that this time the gold would not vanish on ships bound for foreign shores. If God placed this black gold beneath our feet, who dares to say we have no right to claim it? Who can call it dirty when it carries the power to lift millions from the shadows into the light? Somewhere far from this room, in a village where the night sky swallows the horizon, a mother finishes her evening prayer. She does not pray for palaces or jewels. She asks for a single light bulb above the table where her son studies, so he no longer has to squint beneath the trembling flame of a candle. She asks for a fan to stir the thick, stifling night air so her daughter can sleep without sweat soaking through her pillow. And when that light finally comes, will we remember to honor those who fought for it? Will we remember the miners who inhaled the dust, the leaders who risked their names, the people who refused to bow their heads and wait for permission to rise? This was no charity lying before Traore. It was not aid dressed in the costume of generosity. It was a covenant, an unbroken pledge between two nations, both scarred by the same history, both ready to step forward into a future built by their own calloused hands. Yet outside that bright circle of possibility, the shadows were already gathering, the kind that have never walked the red earth of a village, yet believe they have the authority to decide how that village will live. If you believe Africa's treasures were never placed here to be stolen, but to fuel our own strength, write amen in the comments. Let the world see that we do not apologize for wanting light, and we will never be shamed for using what is ours. Because beyond the glass walls of that meeting room, far from the voices of the people, those shadows were already in motion. For every light that blazes in Africa, there are hands reaching to snuff it out. And those hands are where our next battle begins. The shadows moving against this deal did not wear uniforms. They wore perfectly tailored suits, silk ties, and the polished, effortless smiles of men who had never felt the weight of the African sun on their backs. In glass-walled conference rooms high above steel and concrete skylines far removed from the smell of dust. After rain, they spoke in calm, calculated tones about risk assessments and regional stability. But strip away the diplomatic polish, and the truth lay bare. They feared what would happen if Africa learned to hold its own light without asking. In one such room in Washington, the logo of the International Monetary Fund shone under a ring of white lights. Around an oval table, seasoned experts didn't debate whether the Sahel needed energy. They debated who should provide it, who should profit from it, and how to ensure the answer would never be the Sahel itself. Across the ocean in Paris, over polished oak tables that had seen centuries of deals, executives from multinational energy giants spoke in hushed, deliberate voices about market disruptions. They had built their fortunes selling electricity back to the same nations whose raw resources they had bought for pennies. Electricity that was in truth nothing more than Africa's own lifeblood, returned at a price. If this cold deal between Niger and Burkina Faso went through, it would not just dent their profits. It would break the illusion. It would set a precedent, a dangerous proof that the chains could in fact be broken. Why is the world quick to sell us light, yet so slow, almost unwilling to see us build our own? Why do they applaud development only when it flows through their banks, their companies, their terms? Back in Niger, far from these gleaming towers, an old woman named Isata sat on a woven reed mat. Her back curved like the bow of an ancient tree carved by years of work and waiting. Beside her, her granddaughter knelt, struggling to coax a kerosene lamp to life. The flame sputtered, caught, and cast a frail halo across the mud walls. Isata's eyes softened. "It was the same when I was your age," she murmured. "We studied by this light. Our eyes burned. The air stank of fuel. And by morning, even our books smelled the same." She paused, letting the silence weigh heavy. "They have always told us to wait for help, for progress, for their permission. But I have learned the longer you wait for someone else to turn on your light, the longer they will enjoy watching you in the dark. Who benefits when our nights remain unlit? Who writes the rules where the only progress allowed is the progress they control? The truth is this: our darkness has never been a natural state. It has been manufactured, cultivated, because for them, darkness is an asset. In darkness, contracts can be signed without our knowledge. In darkness, our resources can leave without our consent. In darkness, our children grow up hearing the same tired story, that we are incapable of more, that light is a luxury we must rent from others. That is why they fear what lay on Traore's table. It was never just about coal. It was about the loss of their grip, the surrender of control they had held for generations. And they knew once that control slipped away, it would never return. Tag a brother or sister in the diaspora who needs to see the truth the Western headlines will never print. Let them know this struggle is not only about electricity. It is about dignity reclaimed, memory restored, and the undeniable right to write our own future without a foreign editor's pen hovering above the page. But as the boardrooms of Washington and Paris plotted quietly to dim the Sahel's light, something else was taking shape, not in the halls of power, but in the places where power is born. In kitchens where mothers whispered dreams over boiling pots. In open-air markets where news traveled faster than coins could change hands. In the narrow, dusty streets where children's laughter met the sound of hammers and shovels. For every shadow that fears the light, there were flames, small, stubborn, and unstoppable, beginning to rise. And soon those flames would push their way into the very heart of this story. In a narrow courtyard of Ouagadougou, the late afternoon sun spilled across the walls, draping them in streaks of molten gold and deep shadow. A family huddled around a small clay stove, the coals inside glowing like a bed of quiet embers beneath a dented, time-worn pot. The scent of rice and rich sauce, sizzling in oil, drifted lazily into the street, wrapping the air in a familiar warmth. Children darted between the walls, bare feet slapping against the packed earth, their laughter weaving itself into the steady rhythm of a wooden spoon scraping the bottom of the pot. This was not simply a meal. This was the heartbeat of the Sahel, a place where food is coaxed into flavor, with patience, where the fire beneath the pot is both a burden and a blessing, where for generations the same blackened chunks of coal have fed the family stove. Yet today, as the mother lifted the lid and a wave of steam curled into the sky, there was a subtle change in the way she moved. She had heard something on the radio, a low, crackling voice announcing that Niger and Burkina Faso were making plans that could bring electricity not just to the wealthy neighborhoods across town, but to homes like hers. Her husband, leaning forward on a low wooden stool, turned the thought over in his mind like a stone in his palm. If one family in Ouagadougou can dream of power in their kitchen, why can we not dream of light for an entire continent? Why should the same coal that warms their evening meal not also guide their children's steps to school under a safe, steady light? Far to the east in Nairobi's crowded streets, another kind of fire roared. Thousands marched beneath the unrelenting Kenyan sun voices, rising in chants that carried over rooftops and markets. Vendors who once kept their stalls lit until the evening rush now stared at electricity bills that devoured half their earnings. Mothers counted coins under the weak glow of bare bulbs, wondering if next month they would be forced to choose between feeding their families and keeping the lights on. When a mother in Nairobi fights the weight of high electricity costs, is her struggle so different from ours? Is the shadow that stretches across her city not cast by the same hands that have kept our villages in darkness for decades? In the kitchens and in the streets, the fight was the same to reclaim what should never have been stolen: the right to light, the right to power, the right to choose. The coals glowing under the family's pot in Ouagadougou burned with the same quiet defiance as the placards lifted high in Nairobi. Both were fed by a single truth: no one should be left in darkness when the very fuel for light lies beneath their own feet. The leaders of Burkina Faso and Niger understood something powerful: if they could connect these fires, the intimate ones that warm meals, and the roaring ones that fill the streets, they would hold something no contract could contain. They would hold a movement. And movements cannot be unplugged like a machine or switched off like a lamp. The mother in Ouagadougou did not know the language of megawatts, kilowatt hours, or regional grids. She had never seen the pages of a billion-dollar contract, but she knew the soft sigh her children made when they bent over their homework by candlelight, the cough from the smoke, the squinting eyes straining over blurred words. She imagined replacing it with the low hum of a light bulb, the crisp pages of a book, the swift scratch of a pencil across paper, uninterrupted by the dying flicker of a flame. Share this with a brother or sister across our borders, because our struggle is not divided by maps. The fire in a kitchen in Ouagadougou and the fire in the streets of Nairobi are sparks from the same blaze, a flame that will only grow if we guard it together. And as those fires burned quietly in homes, fiercely in public squares, somewhere else a map was being drawn. Not in ink, but in the minds of leaders who could see the shape of a different Africa rising. Lines of connection began to stretch across borders, weaving a network not of dependency, but of shared power. A map etched in black and gold, and its first lines were already shifting the balance of the Sahel. It began with a single phone call, a thin, crackling thread of sound stretching from Bamako to Ouagadougou. On the other end, Mali's leadership had been listening, watching and measuring every headline, every rumor about the Black Gold Pact between Niger and Burkina Faso. And now the words finally came without hesitation: Mali wanted in. This was no gesture for the cameras. Mali saw in this coalition not just a trade agreement, but an opportunity to redraw the very rules of the Sahel. They envisioned power lines rising like steel arteries from Niger's coalfields, weaving through Burkina Faso's growing grids, and flowing into Mali's towns and villages, carrying not just electricity, but a living proof that African nations could build something monumental without waiting for Paris, Washington, or Brussels to hand them the blueprint. Yet while these lifelines were being traced in open daylight, others were being sketched in the shadows. In the silent corridors of Paris, behind doors padded against eavesdroppers, men in immaculate suits spoke softly of regional stability. But beneath the polished language was the same old truth: a united, self-sufficient Sahel would shatter the balance of dependence that had kept their coffers full for decades. Reports began to trickle out, whispers of lobbying in global banks, of quiet threats to equipment suppliers, of subtle pressure to choke the project before it took its first breath. If we can generate and export power, why do our own children still bend over books by candlelight? Why must our electricity cross oceans before it reaches the fields where our farmers work in the dark? Whose hand will draw the map of Africa's future, ours or theirs? The answer hung on whether this fragile alliance could withstand the invisible weight pressing down from every side. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traore sat with his closest advisors, a vast map of the Sahel spread out before them. Solid black lines marked the existing power grid. Dotted lines, delicate, hopeful traced, proposed new transmission routes linking villages that had never known steady light. Each line drawn was deliberate, as though the pen itself was heavy with centuries of unfinished work. In Bamako, Mali's ministers mirrored the scene, marking their own towns and rural outposts, dreaming of the day when blackout schedules would be relics of the past. And in Niamey, Niger's engineers drafted plans for coal plants and converter stations, their pencils scratching visions of humming turbines and illuminated streets into the paper. This was the new map of the Sahel, not carved by colonial surveyors with foreign interests in mind, but drawn by the calloused hands of those who walked its soil and drank its water. The black lines of transmission routes over golden plains looked like veins pumping life into a body that had been starved for too long. But as the vision sharpened, so too did the resistance. French diplomats issued public warnings about environmental concerns, while in private they worried openly about market stability code for protecting profits that had never flowed back to the people. International media, with their carefully chosen words, began framing the deal as reckless, risky, even dangerous, not to the people of the Sahel, but to the interests of those who lived far beyond its borders. On the ground, the people heard it differently. In the marketplaces of Mopti, in the bustling streets of Bobo Dioulasso, traders recalled that the last time they were told to wait for the right moment, that moment never arrived. In the quiet hours after sunset, families gathered around their radios listening to their leaders speak of unity, while also catching the faint edge of foreign resistance in every carefully phrased question. Comment rise if you believe that one day Africa will power itself and the world. Let them see this is not just the dream of a handful of presidents, but the shared will of millions who refuse to live in the dark. Because as these lines on the map deepened into reality, darker shapes were gathering at the edges. Somewhere beyond the horizon, forces were already moving to smother this project before it could light its first bulb. And in the days ahead, the Sahel would learn once again that every path to sunrise must pass through the fiercest part of the storm. It began not with thunder, but with a whisper. A single headline slid quietly onto a handful of news sites before rippling outward like a slow, deliberate poison through the airwaves. Sahel Energy Project suspended, indefinitely stamped in the cold authority of capital letters. No source to stand behind it, no voice from those who had built the dream, just a flat verdict meant to sound final, the light extinguished before it had even been lit. By midday, the rumor had grown fangs. In the markets of Ouagadougou, traders leaned across their stalls, voices low, asking if the news was true. In Niamey, taxi drivers turned down their radios, their brows furrowed as talk show hosts debated the collapse of the Black Gold Project. On WhatsApp voice notes, multiplied friends swearing they had heard it from someone inside the ministry, cousins, claiming they had seen the documents. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. It broke just days after Mali declared its intention to join. Just days after maps of new power lines began circulating online, igniting hope in villages that had known only darkness. And alongside the rumor came something more insidious, carefully crafted statements from foreign diplomats urging patience, phone calls from Washington, couched in the language of partnership, and polite but unmistakable reminders from the World Bank that international funding always comes with conditions. If this light is ours, who decided they could switch it off? Who gave them the right to dictate how far our electricity can travel? In Ouagadougou's backstreets, the damage began to show. A young seamstress who ran a modest tailoring shop by the central market told her neighbor she had dreamed of working late into the evening without the hiss and smoke of a kerosene lamp. "I thought this project meant I could keep my doors open after dark," she sighed. But now, maybe it was too good to believe. In Niamey, an elderly miner who had spent 30 years pulling black dust from the earth told his grandson, "Do not let them plant doubt in you. The same people who made us wait half a century for change are the ones telling you now to give up." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the strain of carrying too many broken promises in memory. By week's end, the whisper had swollen into a storm. The pressure was no longer invisible. Behind closed doors, envoys from the United States spoke in guarded tones about regional security concerns and the need for oversight. Analysts from Western think tanks appeared on television, their expressions grave, questioning whether leaders like Traore and his Nigerian counterpart were ready to bear such responsibility. When lies run faster than truth, who will carry the real story? Will you be the one to pass it on, or will you let their version stand alone in the history books? Then came the moment no rumor could erase. In Ouagadougou's central square, under a sky thick with the ochre haze of the Harmattan wind, Ibrahim Traore stood side by side with Niger's president. There were no gilded podiums, no velvet curtains, only two leaders facing their people without barrier. "This light is ours," Traore's voice rang out sharp and steady, slicing through the dusty air. "We will build it with our own hands and we will keep it burning with our own will. We will not ask permission to see our children's faces lit at night." His counterpart placed a hand over his heart and said, "They can print their lies in every language they know, but the truth is already written here." Night had fallen over the Sahel, yet for one small village it was not the same kind of night they had always known. The old suffocating blanket of darkness was pierced softly, almost like a secret revealed by a row of humble bulbs strung along the main road, each one flickering into life with a low, steady hum. The light was not harsh. It was warm golden and alive, as if the very soil had decided it was time to glow. Children spilled into the streets, their bare feet kicking up little clouds of dust, as a ball darted between them, its every arc and spin now visible instead of swallowed by blackness. Their laughter traveled far unchained from the heavy silence that had once pressed it down. Outside a small church on the edge of the village, elders gathered hands, clasped eyes lifted to the sky in prayer. The gentle glow fell across their faces, tracing the lines of decades, illuminating the stories carved into their skin. Inside, voices rose in an old hymn, the harmony curling around the electric hum, the past and the future meeting in one long, unbroken note. From another corner came the slow, hypnotic beat of a drum. Young men and women danced in the soft light, their shadows leaping and bending across mud walls. This was not just celebration. This was declaration: we are here. We are no longer hidden. On the edge of the square, a grandmother sat watching, her smile both tender and knowing. She remembered the first time she had heard the story not of electricity, but of a neighbor in a far-off town who had once dared to knock on a closed door, demanding something better. Tonight she understood the knocking had come full circle. It was no longer Niger coming to Burkina Faso, nor leaders coming down to the people. It was the people themselves finding the courage to knock on the door of their own future and discovering it unlocked. If one village can light its streets, why not 1,000? If one generation can lift the switch, why not the next? The children's game carried on the ball, slipping from shadow to light and back again. Each flash a reminder the work was not finished. Most of the land still lay in darkness. This switch was just the first of many yet to be flipped. When the moment comes to carry the light forward, will you be ready? Will you bring it to the next village, the next town, the next border, until there are no more places left for darkness to hide our dreams? The speeches made in the capital had been stirring, but this was the proof that mattered. Not in signed contracts or drafted policies, but in the eyes of a child reading after sunset for the first time, in the hands of a mother cooking, without fumbling, in the dark, in the quiet, faithful hum of a bulb that answered to no foreign master. Pass this story to one more person before the day is done, because light survives only when it is carried forward. Let it cross from your hands to theirs, across rivers, across oceans, across generations, until the glow is too wide, too bright for anyone to put out. The night in the Sahel is long, but it is not without end. Somewhere beyond this village, another switch is waiting to be turned. Another road will shimmer. Another drum will begin its beat. And another door, the door to a future we own, will be knocked upon, not by strangers, but by us. Because in the end, the candle is not the final victory. The candle is the spark, and we do not keep it for ourselves. We pass it forward again and again until the horizon itself catches fire with light. The crowd roared, not for eloquence, but for recognition. The words were plain, but they carried the weight of something rare, the sound of leaders who spoke like the people they served. The storm did not vanish in that moment, but it lost the teeth that could frighten. People walked away with heads lifted, carrying the ember of that promise into their kitchens, their markets, their mosques, their churches. Do not let their lies outlive our truth. Share this. So the echo of that day reaches from the cities to the most distant villages, from the Sahel to the diaspora, until their whispers are drowned in our voice. And as the crowd dissolved into the labyrinth of dusty streets, one truth held fast: the sun had not yet breached the horizon, but its first fragile light was already there. In that still hour before dawn, every heart in the Sahel understood the same thing: the fiercest test was yet to come, and it would begin the moment that light touched the ground.